Hello, and welcome to Our World Today, the Universe Perspective. We're very happy to be with you today to talk about the news in a different way with our perspective and try to bring some peace into things that are a little bit sensationalized most of the time. So, our program for today is basically to mainly talk about carbon footprint and what the roles that it plays in climate change and how we can have a better understanding of the way we consume resources. And then we'll move on to South Korea with um, the president that attempted to pass a martial law. And then, if we have time, we'll talk about how Europe is kind of um, moving the needle based on Donald Trump coming back into power and everything that it entails geopolitically. So yeah, follow along if you're interested in one of these three topics or maybe all three. And we'll start with an interesting extract from a podcast that we we saw like a few days ago. It was Sage that found it actually. And we talked about carbon footprint. So would you like to kind of, set the tone and explain what the podcast was about and the details?
Yeah. So this podcast interview, whatever it was clipped as a reel between it was Tucker Carlson, he's a conservative American journalist guy. He interviewed Vladimir Putin kind of recently, something you
Ooh.
might know for. But he was interviewing RFK Jr., Robert Bobby Kennedy Jr.
Mhm.
Of the Kennedy family that you might know as well. And they were talking about basically RFK Jr.'s point was that making so like quantifying and commodifying, like putting a price on carbon neutrality, like and only focusing on like carbon footprint and counting that and trying to get that as low as possible overall or in everything is like detrimental because it's kind of counter to the spirit of environmental preservation. And he was kind of saying, like, basically, instead of making this about counting everything and also making money off of the whole process of reducing carbon emissions, the environmental preservation should be about preserving the environment because of our love for it, ourselves, future generations, and how the environment helps us connect to our divinity. And so he was suggesting to take that view of it instead of thinking of it only as a numbers game and also like a part of the economy um, that you can make money off of and everything like that. So it was an interesting perspective. In the Unionism Spiritual Discussion group where we live streamed this talk, Shaleia shared that actually, that little clip. And I thought it was really interesting because I had never thought about it like that, or I guess identified that as like an issue. So yeah, thought it was interesting.
Yeah, so what exactly didn't you identify in here? What did you think was not a non-issue in this?
Well, I had never thought about like carbon emissions and stuff like that, and maybe like that focus on them too much, or that the kind of like the way that carbon offsets or credits are like turned into a part of the economy. I never thought of that as being like an issue. But bringing that up, it does feel like there's some sort of vibe that's definitely off there. Not saying like reducing carbon emissions I'm not talking about, but kind of the way that they're counting it, or the way that sometimes people focus too much on it, or especially like buying and selling carbon credits and stuff like that. Like that's people have their like criticisms of that. But yeah, I was feeling there's some vibe there that he was pointing to. I feel like he was pointing more toward a vibe and toward a like a choice and an intention rather than like concrete things. Anyway, we can explain a little bit more, but I thought it was an interesting point.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, it's definitely interesting. So I want, I wanted to take this with a grain of salt, because it's not bad, it's not helpful, and I think as you say it's bad, it's more bad. It's complicated. I think our governments lean too much on it. I think it's definitely worth reducing our carbon emission, or at least try to balance it, because usually people basically either, you know, aerial, plane companies, flight companies, they either pay a tax on carbon footprint or they try to balance it out with, rarely, but it happens, doing an action like planting, planting a tree instead. And I think it is essential to have that because obviously CO2 is the main reason um, for pollution. Air pollution is our um, most, one of our most important, I guess, fights against climate change. The problem is that when people try to reduce carbon footprint, they also try to quantify it through financial means. So having a financial gain, paying less taxes on it, or things like that. And it doesn't account with the other things that people are doing that may counterbalance something else like carbon footprint, but that is as detrimental or more to our environment. And that problem is that it's really well illustrated with the fact that in the past months, Amazon has um, announced being aiming to be a zero net carbon footprint company in 2025. The problem is that they are building a nuclear plant in the means to do that. And a nuclear plant, we do not yet know how to destroy or recycle in a way that doesn't damage the I guess the trash of a nuclear plant, the radioactive trash, if I may say so. And I think it's really important that there are a lot of tactics with Carlson that sometimes show that he uses this type of um, we're not sure that this is efficient yet rhetoric in order to advance the agenda of a more Republican type of nobody needs to chip in financially or even in terms of actions something if we don't know how to do it yet. And he's smart in that because a lot of people don't want to engage conversation with right and far right people in climate change, where actually some people in right and far right parties are interested in talking about that. They're just not interested in investing money from a free market where they don't see a return of investment that feels good, I would say. And it's funny because like every time we talk about something like that, I feel like our discussion is just going to be labeled by people who are extremely polarized as either taking party from one party or the other, but that's not it. I'm trying to expose all the sides, and really all the sides is that you have to be careful who this comes through. I think he has a really important message here, but it's really important that it doesn't sway people in entirely stopping um, the fight for against carbon emission. Because if we don't start now, if we try to be perfect before starting, um, and if we don't invest our time, energy, and money in it, until we have a surefire way to fight it, well, we're not going to do any progress because progress comes through just moving, not staying stagnant. So that doesn't feel divine either to just not move like one may suggest after hearing that podcast. But it's clear that carbon emission has been put in the hands of the biggest polluting companies in this world, and they're clearly using it as a marketing tool more than an actual fight for climate change. And in that way, Bobby Kennedy may be right in saying that you actually need to have a really an appetence, like a closeness to the subject to really want to fight climate change. And it is clear that for now, the GAFAM big companies, um, it's not in their interest yet. I see Amazon's thing as a marketing tool for now, and coming back to nuclear is really, really bad, in my opinion. But yeah, I don't know. How do you feel about that? That was a really long expose, but
Yeah, no, that's cool. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like the yeah, I feel like what RFK Jr. was talking about, what he was pointing to was deeper. It's deeper than anything they're talking about on the surface. Like reduce carbon emissions, don't reduce carbon emissions. How do we do it? It's not about that at all. It's about the underlying intention, right? Of
right.
everything. That the underlying intention should be to preserve our environment, to essentially connect with our divinity, connect with our good. Don't sacrifice our good, don't throw it out. Like you don't cut off your um like Homer Simpson, there's a part where he like cut a finger off and it fell on the grill. And he's like, oh, this is actually really yummy.
Oh
And
no.
so sorry for that. Jeff used it in a sermon once as an example, but you just don't take from one part of yourself to like give to another part because that's not real. That's not real progress.
Right.
So he's saying that, and also, so that's helpful. And sometimes yeah, like you might be like, oh, we're cutting carbon, right? But there's a catch. Like it's actually not happening, or it comes with other potentially negative impacts. So
Mm,
that's good to be aware of. And you don't want to see a buzzword and then just stop there. You have to be like, well, wait, well, okay, so tell me like how's this gonna happen? So that's a good point. And then I also I felt it was potentially helpful for some people to hear that protecting the environment is about connecting to our divinity because there might be a lot of people who feel skeptical about climate change and climate science because of the generally sometimes rocky relationship between religion and science, or the concept that there's no way that it's arrogant for humans to think that we could influence the climate. That's like God's realm, right? And you could think that, but it's cool to have it be like, no, like nature is a way that we connect to divinity within us, and it's the way one of the most powerful ways in which God communicates to us, and that is the kind of rhetoric that cuts across party lines, and it's something that you probably wouldn't hear from politicians who are more on the left end of the spectrum, right? Because they tend to keep the rhetoric they tend to keep it pretty non-religious, besides saying God bless America. I don't know, in France, it might even be, is it you can mention God on the left in the US, but you don't, most politicians don't go out of their way to use like that kind of like religious or divine talk. And I thought that was cool. So,
Mhm. Yeah, it's interesting. Culturally, I think like there's a shift. Thank you for bringing that up because
yeah.
I feel there is mostly like people are getting mad on TikTok again
Uh,
because right and far right people, politicians are de facto, from what we knew so far, not interested in climate change. Um,
mhm.
and so when a journalist came to interview somebody from the far right because he was mayor of a city that was impacted with something that climate change made happen, or when that politician signed a petition, people said that um, the journalist was problematic, where the journalist is mostly ecologist. He's an ecologist journalist, so he's the one that is going to go into the farms to make sure that the animals are treated right, and that our waters are not polluted or things like that. That type of extreme investigation, right? So I think it's interesting. I remember learning in political science that every few decades, the spectrum shifts, right? It's funny because people tend to forget that Democrats were more like pro-slavery 200 years ago, but it was another time. The party didn't have um, a lot of the characteristics that it still has now. It's just a name now. And so usually like parties change. And I think it's evident that climate change is just coming into a more general conversation. And hopefully this is not just used to win the electorate. But the matter of the fact is the conversation is being had anyway. And I think we need that. And may not be pleasant to see that type of conversation from what some people consider an unfriendly face, but it happens and it's made for an audience and also it's showing us something. And I think it's showing us actually something good that people are aware that, oh, like we need like a complete solution. Um, and that goes through, yeah, maybe carbon emission is for the companies, but then we need something to counterbalance for the civilians, for example, or I don't know, something that is maybe less tax based, but that could balance out and encourage the companies to do something with another currency, maybe the attention of people instead of a tax. And that type of reflection really opens because of these types of discussions. So yeah, I think there's a lot of good in it for sure.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. I'm hoping that this is an actual shift to climate change exists, point blank, and um, the other discourse would be left to maybe Trump and some like crazy extremists and I don't know, conspiracy flat earthers like people, but most of the people would actually have at least the beginning of an understanding about what we need there, what our earth and our environment needs. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Cool. So what do you think about talking about the past 48 hours in South Korea and what happened politically?
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know very much about it, but I will supply any feelings, thoughts, and information that might be helpful.
Okay. Okay, so last night, South Korea time, so it was morning for us, maybe afternoon. The president put a martial law in front of parliament. He announced on TV that he wanted the army to have more power, basically. This is as extreme as it sounds. It really is. A martial law is what we call as a siege state in France. It's like when you're besieged by an opponent, and so the army takes over, kind of. It's really explained quickly, but um, basically, it gives more power to the army, and also it kind of restricts and censors a part of the um, a part of the opposing parties and the media by also restricting access to parliament for them. And what happened is that in 1 hour and a half or less, the parliament rebuked that it refused this martial law. But people had the time to take down the street and really say that this was like not possible and that they didn't want it. The reason that the president gave was that he wanted to limit the influence of the communist um, lines and parties of North Korea 60 years after the beginning of the war. And the last time there was a martial law in South Korea, it was in 1980. Um, so I think if we were to have listened to only the president's speech, it may look like maybe there was a rise of communism from branches of South Korea happening, maybe. But I think the visceral reaction of the general public and the parliament was kind of a telltale sign. And so I'm curious to know what you think about it, Sage.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, cool. Sorry, my video is a little behind,
That's
but
okay.
hopefully the audio is still. So, um, yeah, it does. It feels to me like a power grab, but I feel like I might be missing some context about the political situation and stuff in South Korea, and also how much of a um how much of an influence people who are sympathetic to North Korea might have in South Korea. So I don't know how much an actual problem that is, but um yeah, it could just be a way to kind of like seize power during a time when people feel more there might be kind of more concern from people about North Korea right now because like North Korea has been possibly like some things that they've been doing um seem like oh it could be preparation for like a conflict with South Korea or something, and obviously North Korean troops are like serving in Ukraine right now, you know, under Russia. So it could be kind of it could be somebody who is trying to seize power by capitalizing on concern about that, you know. So yeah, that was my feeling about it, especially since people were like so opposed to it, and even the parliament was so opposed to it. So, but yeah, I don't really, but without knowing more details, I couldn't say anything else about that.
Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
know if there's more details that we know about it because I don't know if it's true. What is weird about it is that the military, directly following President Yoon's speech, the military said that anyone, any party or citizen who would oppose what was said or um, behave irrationally um, would be stabilized or countered
Mhm.
or contained by the military. And doctors
Yeah.
went on strike for 48 hours, and the military itself ordained them to go back to work. And so, even if a martial law was not yet voted by parliament, they were already in action. So, it does feel like a lot of power got from the president and the military. Um, but the problem is that I don't think we're missing context. I think they just didn't explain, both the president and the military, why they were doing it. What were the exact threats that were doing it? Because the public was pretty adamant that the president should step down, and the parliament was pretty adamant that this was a threat for our democracy, and that democracy should be made with its people, not um, not on the side of its people, maybe sometimes against. So I really don't think we're missing context. I think it just feels like there's no real explanation. And I think a lot of people in Seoul felt that. And even the United States, Washington said that he was very worried about what was happening in Seoul at night. And so it's really clear that there was no consultation with the international geopolitical landscape. And it feels like even Washington was kind of surprised. Like, what do you mean? What threat of communist branches would be infiltrating the country right now? Because it didn't seem to be aware of that. And it's the United States. So, yeah, I don't know.
Right. And it's kind of like that's not a problem that would suddenly crop up in South Korea. It's a problem that you would have to continuously kind of look out for and be like, hey, like let's always keep an eye out and make sure that, no North Korean sympathizers or whatever are like trying to infiltrate our country and government because they very well might because they you know how North Korea is. Like they don't play nice. So kind of weird to all of a sudden say, "Oh my gosh, there's this huge North Korean communist threat," which it's weird. It's weird. I mean,
Yeah.
was he trying? Well, I had this feeling too, like intuitionally, like the president was calculating. He was like, "Okay, so anyone who is like it could appeal potentially to like the older generation who are closer to when the split happened between North and South Korea, when the Korean War happened, because and kind of like reverting back to old ways, old times, it can be tempting to try to use that kind of rhetoric, during a time when a lot of change is happening or the things seem unstable, which they kind of do right now in East Asia. So he could be like, oh, this will be a big hit with the older generation. Maybe the doctors going on strike, it reminds me of like, South Korean doctors were threatening to go on strike too. At least I know they were at least threatening to before because they were like
Mm,
wanting better pay and stuff and not wanting a huge expansion of doctors in the country.
mm,
concerns about pay and benefits. And so he could have been like being like, hey, maybe the public is sick of people rebelling and choosing not to work. So, but maybe martial law would be popular with them. I don't know. I'm just trying to like see what could possibly be the thinking here because it's kind of weird. Okay.
So let me add maybe a little bit of context, or maybe add to the confusion, whichever case. I Even people from the Conservative Party, from which Yoon is, I think,
Mhm.
his principal opponent inside the Conservative Party, and other people that may seem like the older generation, um, said that his announcement was illegal and unconstitutional.
Hmm.
And then Yoon said in his speech that martial law would help rebuild and protect the country from falling into the depths of national ruin. And he said he would eradicate pro-North Korean forces and protect the constitutional democratic order. Again, his speech makes it feel like this is something that is happening right now, that it is sudden, that there is a declaration of war. But it's been 60 years, and South Korea have never been like because of the soft power of K-pop that they have, unless they're super bad at managing their finances, it has never been as thriving as it is. So what is ruin?
Yeah.
Because with political ruin, like I mean, it would have happened 50 years ago, or maybe 45 years ago, at the time of the last martial law, if it really would have happened. It doesn't seem like there is a real threat of attack. We haven't heard Kim Jong-un in all of this week. Amidst this, he hasn't like said something. He wasn't very proud, or he didn't say like nee, 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 like or mock everything. He didn't do a declaration of attack. He didn't send missiles anywhere. So there is no immediate threat. There is no physical threat. Maybe there would be an economical threat, but it doesn't seem like it is the state of South Korea. So I think it's pretty clear that even people in his party say that it's illegal and unconstitutional, I don't know. But he was like, I will eradicate pro-North Korean forces. I will eliminate anti-state forces as quickly as possible and normalize the country. I mean, everyone is like, maybe the only thing that I can think is indeed the cyber attacks. But all countries have cyber attacks every day. If we all made it into martial law just to counter a cyber attack and eradicate things in the country, we, I mean, there would be no democracy anymore anywhere. Um, and you know what that makes me think about? That speech feels kind of Netanyahu coded. I
Yeah.
don't know. It's kind of, I will eradicate,
Oh.
I will
Mhm.
have all power here and I will eradicate the threat. And I think in the past year, if we've learned one lesson, it's pretty much that giving the power to one or two men just to eradicate the threat, and giving up your democratic liberties, to be honest, it doesn't necessarily work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because otherwise we wouldn't have a war anymore in the Middle East. Yeah, it doesn't necessarily work.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah, you know.
Yeah. Well, that's weird. Plus, too, I think it's a lesson that if someone is coming from a place of fear, it feels like this is because it's like the intentions are clearly way different than what he stated because there's
Mhm.
no basis for his claims, right? So there's an agenda there that's like trying to be hidden. He's trying to hide. when someone's acting from that place of fear, they want you to like believe in it and be like, "Oh, I believe you. You're powerful. I should be scared. Okay, I'll listen to you." And it's just like the person does not have the kind of power you think they do. They
Right,
just want you to believe it, but it's not even them. It's like ego. Like ego wants you to think, "Oh, this fear, it's so scary. Better give up all my power." And it's just like, no, that's not going to happen. Many times people will say they're going to do something or promise something or whatever. It's like you have no capability to even do that. The problem you're talking about doesn't even exist or not at the scale you're saying. And in this case, we miraculously saw in a society that people in government and not in government all like speak out and say, call the bullshit. Just refreshing. As an American, I find that refreshing to see that exist somewhere. So cool. Anyway,
yeah. So, yeah, yeah. Nadia, who is traveling today, has commented actually and said, like, I feel like South Korea gave their power away somewhere, probably because of the current times. Mm, there may be a feeling of being a little bit powerless to North Korea for sure, because every time Kim Jong-un has like upped his demonstration with missiles, citizens, and were kind of in a frenzy. But definitely because they thought that the first thing he would do was aim the missiles at Seoul, for sure. So I can understand why they feel that way. But yeah, maybe like even with an aggressor as big as Kim Jong-un, there's definitely a feeling of powerlessness that is coming through. But yeah, they'll have to figure that out. Yeah. Mhm. Talking of powerlessness, I think the next country that we're talking about doesn't necessarily have powerlessness, not at least this week, because we're talking about the country of Georgia. If you don't know where, well, let's say Georgia, to not confuse it with the state of Georgia in the United States.
oh yeah,
So
yeah,
Georgia is a country south of Russia on these little belts of mountains and little Slavic um, ex-Yugo ex-USSR countries.
yeah,
Um, that is too up north to be Middle Eastern, um, and really just below Russia. And Georgia has had elections the last months. We've talked about them. And re-election at maybe 88% of the votes of the new government wasn't a pleasing one because it was clear that the people did not want that. And seeing the number of people that are in the streets to protest, it kind of feels very unlikely that it was an 88% win, even if we're just counting the capital city of Tbilisi. And they've taken down the street again. So let me read a little bit what we have.
mhm,
Thousands of demonstrators in the Georgian capital converged on parliament again on Tuesday, venting outrage against the governing party's decision to suspend negotiation on joining the European Union. So this is a little bit different. Georgia has been wanting to be part of the European Union for years now. Um, and I think they're clearly dissatisfied with their current leader and the current handling of things. So maybe it feels like it's powerful to come down the street, but I think it's mirroring to the people a little bit of powerlessness because a lot of people are saying like Russia has ruined us for all of these years. Now we want to be free. And freedom for a lot of people must come through European Union, which may be the solution or may not be. And I think there is no wrong answers here, but there is first a feeling of really claiming your power as an independent country first to move through, um, and having welcoming support from your neighbors if it comes, but really like not just standing on it, like standing as well on your own 2 feet, having a right balance of support and autonomy. And yeah, it's just what is coming up from reading the first few paragraphs of the article. But Sage, how do you feel about this?
Yeah. It feels like, yeah, it does feel like it's a moment of like, it does feel like it's a moment of empowerment for people, for a lot of people in Georgia, like to protest and speak up against all of this that's happening. It feels like weird that the party, what was it, the Georgian Dream Party is the one that they claim won 88%, right? Um, yeah, so it feels weird to me, like it feels like um just strange and kind of weak to me for them to claim that kind of victory. Because if you're trying to, so if you're trying to commit fraud, don't make it obvious, right? This is one thing that I haven't understood about countries where they like pretend to have democracy, but then they like rig the election or they subvert it. They'll say something like, "Oh my God, Robert Mugabe, like in Zimbabwe, won with 90% of the vote," or they'll be like, "Georgian Dream won with 88% of the vote," and it's just like, who are you trying to fool here? Like, who is gonna believe that? Do you know what I'm saying here? And I'm like, if you're gonna lie, why not be clever about it and say, oh, we won by 55%, 55%. Like
Yeah,
to explain what is the logic here?
just like everybody else. Like we won by 55%, 60% maybe somewhere. But it never happens again. However, I do think that we have a cultural rhetoric of having grown up in democratic countries.
Right.
And I think that in the mind of a leader that doesn't necessarily have this cultural upbringing of democratic countries, eat or value something else like forcing people to abide by them or physical brutality or really
Yeah.
asserting some kind of power again through force. um I don't pretend to understand all of this because that is clearly not our culture, but there is definitely a feeling of like we want to show that the power is grand and
Right.
it mustn't be um discutable discutable
Yeah.
as it must be like a novel wave of winning,
Yeah.
right? A 97% for Putin or a 90% in Zimbabwe, a 90% in Mozambique.
Yeah.
And then you see all the protests, but you know, leaders they see regularly that nothing changes even if people protest. This time, I think maybe Georgia may be able to recall an election um, to vote their entry into the EU. But yeah, there is this weird cultural assertion of power, but it's fake power. It's funny that we're talking so much about power tonight, but yeah.
Okay. I feel that, You're right. You know what? Yeah, feeling into it, it feels, and thinking about it too, it feels like when you say you won by 88%, people who it can feel, yes, it can feel more powerful. And people who choose to believe what you're saying are people who put you on a pedestal, or even, sometimes like politicians who are like dictatorial, even politicians who are democratically elected, sometimes people often are looking for somebody who's going to come and who's going to save them, right? And so they will block out anything negative, anything, compromising about the person or just anything that they could have done better. And they will overemphasize or hyperinflate any positive things, right? And I think that we're just seeing this in a big scale when it comes to someone who's an authoritarian or a dictator. The person, in the eyes of someone who supports them, they're like larger than life. They're like deified. You're turning them into almost like God.
Mhm.
And so you've got to say that you won by 88%, right? Because for a true believer, that's the gospel truth, and how dare you challenge it? And for someone who's going up against it, you've got to convince somebody who's living in this reality that reality is actually here, like way far away, instead of it being like, oh, I just won by 50, like 51%, let's say. And the other person says, no, no, you lost and you were actually at 49%. Those realities are much closer,
Right.
right? So for somebody to go from believing we won by 88% to saying actually we lost and we only got like 40 some percent, it's a big jump, and it makes it tough for people to reconcile that in their minds, right? It
Yeah.
creates that cognitive dissonance.
There is even something to say about the fact that it may not even be about the Georgian people per se, but more so about the fact that the president-elect is most probably from a branch of the pro-Russian party.
Mhm.
And culturally, again, it's more like if you win by more than 80%, you're probably like very strong, very manly in the
Yeah.
culture, in the Russian culture, in the way that they see force, strength, power versus weakness. And you kind of have to prove to big brother Russia that you are strong as well. Otherwise, like you may not be able to stay in that pro-Russian party, whether you have close or loose ties with Russia anyway, because that region is pretty much still controlled by pro-Russian parties. We've seen it with a few countries in the
Mhm.
past few years, but yeah, yeah, there's definitely something to say about it. It's such, yeah. So my only question now is, with all that we've discussed tonight, um, how would you define all of their feelings about power, all of this country's feelings about power, and what is true power then?
Like Georgia, for Georgia.
Yeah, but also for South Korea, and yeah, it's like in general.
They're yeah, they're feeling like power is like your ability to like it's like control basically. Like they're just saying like it's the power for like I'm sorry. Power is the ability for you as an individual to like make things happen, like the leader makes things happen. Everything goes their way, um, that kind of thing. But that's actually control, and like, yeah, and real power is peace, and it's an alignment with something that already exists. Like you could call it God, or you could call it peace, or like truth, like an alignment with something, the thing that is peaceful. And I feel like that's the thing where people feel confused there about it. I don't know. What would you say?
Yeah, I think there are several things here. I would say we've seen a pattern of uprising through the citizens of the countries, and there's definitely a trend of feeling like um, some people at least don't want to be powerless anymore. They just don't know how to not feel powerless in a society that has branding power as having, I guess, material abundance. And then you have the leaders and governments that either feel powerless already or want to cling to power more. And we see this in every country. It's just that when someone has more, as you said, authoritarian ideas than in other countries, it shows more. But I think it's the same pattern everywhere. We have this in France, and I'm sure like there's a clinging of power we see it everywhere. And so it's like two sides of the same coin. Everyone is feeling powerless and trying to grab it from somewhere different. Europe or Georgia, which may be good, again, maybe a good thing. Uh, but it may not be like the all-around saving solution that they feel would be their freedom because they still share a border with Russia and they still have a leader that is pretty much maybe probably pro-Russian. And because it's something that you feel at the core anyway. So piggybacking on that, in my own phrase, how to get true power would be to, first of all, heal into feeling powerful inside of yourself, knowing that you're not weak, you're not a victim, that it's good to take to the streets when you don't agree with something, which may help Georgian people call in a new election, at least for Europe. Maybe not the new general election, but at least for Europe. But also really, really, really understand that physical fight is tiring. It takes from energy. You cannot sustain it as long as you'd want to. The real power that you're seeking is inside. When you seek real power inside, boundaries come in a more natural way. And then you attract more peaceful, um, more peaceful situation. The key is not to feel discouraged, and it's easy, super easy to feel discouraged. Um, in a society where you feel like everything is going to shit and like to have a better future, but you don't know what the solution is. But there is an element of trusting that when you bring that peace and solution of feeling good to yourself, well, it brings that power and peace as well on the outside. And yeah, that would be it. Pretty much what you said with an explanation. Um, like
Yeah.
intro, development, conclusion type of
Yeah,
extension.
totally. Yeah, and basically, yeah, the way that we live as unionists and that we keep practicing, as unionists is to um, you know, to love yourself within, like identify what's upsetting you, take your power back from that by loving yourself within, take action from a place that feels good, um, take action based on like peace and stuff, and you live your life, and then you can overcome any of these factors these outside factors that appear to be getting in the way of you having what you want or your good or your peace. You overcome it within, and then on the outside too, like taking action, and you create your heaven on earth regardless of what happens, and all the bad experiences, quote unquote, don't happen to you. Like it kind of it doesn't, it's not your reality. It flows around you. And when you're making choices that are aligned and good, things that are aligned and good come into your reality. And I've seen this before. Like, what's a good example? Like the traffic, like if I'm driving and I feel upset that everyone's disrespectful to me, then people will cut me off and they won't let me merge and they'll just be mean. And if I'm peaceful and I feel, let's say, self-respecting and I give myself that, then I can switch lanes easily. Nobody's mean, or if they are, if people drive in a stupid way all the time, it doesn't have to upset you,
Yeah.
right? So that two different realities, right? I created that for myself by healing. And so that's what you can do. And that's definitely been true in all of our journeys as unionists. Translating that from the our individual lives to like the scale of like a whole country's politics is something that I still have a lot of questions about. Like I do not know how that would work. I mean, I guess once you reach a critical mass or something of people are, I don't know what, but maybe we can, I don't know. What would you have to say about that? I have
Solving world problems.
I have
I
no
think
idea.
it comes it if you say like solving world problems and say, I have no idea, you kind of have this rhetoric of you see the mountain, but you see the top of the mountain and you don't know how to climb it. But like if you just like any other journey, think about taking the first step, maybe exploring that mushroom that hit radioactive things in Chernobyl, that new alternative way to treat the environment, that healing that makes you feel good, that you can share with other people. So it makes them feel good, and maybe someday we'll also reach a leader that realize that the power that he seeks is not from clinging to several mandates, but more so within. And same for the country. If you're feeling about all of these little steps, you'll have a solution. And I think it's really hard to understand right now and to fathom into society that way. Most people, like most of my friends say like, I don't think this is a solution because nobody will ever want like people are well-meaning, but sometimes they're still kind of a jerk, like 1% of the time say, yeah, but that's the goal. You can heal that 1%. And they don't believe in it, but that's okay. But there is definitely something to say about like if that works for people in manifesting their dreams, and maybe they don't call it manifesting, sometimes they just call it reaching a goal, and they just keep putting one step in front of the other to reach that goal. Well, why wouldn't it work on a global scale like politics or social impact or climate change? And if we apply that rhetoric to ourselves, so bringing compassion to ourselves, and if we apply that rhetoric to our society, bringing compassion to our society without accepting the bullshit of some people,
Mhm.
well, there's no reason why we wouldn't have an answer eventually. But we must start
Mm.
at the beginning, not by, oh my gosh, what's the solution? Because otherwise we'll just be stuck forever.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
true.
and I think that's it for today.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Sage. Um, my matching follower sister. No, really, thank you for the discussion and thank you to everyone who has watched us live or in the YouTube channel. Thank you to our other members that have working commitments that are still following us and helping us make this thing every week. And if you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment so that we can do more of those. And see you soon. Bye.